making his way to his seat. We have some people on a time crunch, so we want to go ahead and get started. Good morning, Mr. Dave Shep from the Southern Group. We're so happy to have you here to give us a post-session update for the City of Lakeland and our legislative session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor McCarley. Pleasure to see everybody again, especially not in Tallahassee. It's good to see you all here back home. I will try to be relatively quick. However, there is a good amount to cover. We do have the PowerPoint this year as well, so that what I'm saying is covered in here as well, and you have copies of everything. If you have any questions later, please feel free. We'll just go ahead and dive right in. So real quickly, an overview of the session. This year there were 1,800 bills that were filed. That's actually the lowest number of bills since 2016, primarily because they no longer require a bill in the House for appropriations projects. It's simply a form. So that number is artificially low, but interestingly, they did pass 356 bills that are going to be sent to the governor. That's actually the most legislation passed since 2006. So they got a lot of work done this year. Real quickly on the budget, we'll cover Lakeland-specific items in a few minutes, but a little hard to read there. But there is a $117 billion budget this year. That is a 4.5% increase over last year. Since COVID and the pandemic, Florida is rolling in money, quite frankly. I mean, the number of people that are coming to the state of Florida, month after month, we are seeing tremendous increases above expectations on sales tax revenue and other revenues. So $117 billion budget that has not yet gone to the governor, so there will be adjustments made to that when he does his veto process. A record amount going into the environment. I won't run through all of those items, but I do want to touch on the broadband and cybersecurity. There is $40 million for the local government cybersecurity grants for next year. I think that y'all might have already been updated that we have been approved for a grant in the current fiscal year and still working through that process. But they are continuing to try to put money towards local governments to help in your cybersecurity efforts. In addition, $112 million for broadband expansion through DEO, and that is continuing as well. Social services, we'll cover this in a few minutes on affordable housing, but $711 million put in for this year for affordable housing programs. Those include the SAIL program relating to apartments, as well as SHIP relating to housing. $259 million, of that $259 million for the SAIL program, $150 million of that is recurring. The rest is all non-recurring. But a tremendous amount of money they put in for affordable housing this year. In addition, Visit Florida is going to receive $80 million. Job Growth Grant Fund, which is important for us because we have received grants in the past for Lakeland Lender and are pursuing one right now. That is going to be funded again at $75 million. So as I mentioned, the governor has not yet received the budget. We anticipate that should happen this week. The budget will go into effect July 1, but we do anticipate there will be vetoes. Hopefully Polk County will be spared and a lot of the projects that we have. Diving into municipal issues, these are the priorities that we put together prior to session. So we have not only the PowerPoint that we're doing, but also the document in front of you as well. This is the same information. First issue is municipal electric utilities. This was obviously one of our major issues that we had to work against early on during session, and a lot of this stemmed from, unfortunately, one of our sister communities up north, up in Gainesville. Their utility had some challenges that were not received well by the legislature, and as is not uncommon, when there is a problem in one part of the state, legislation is filed that impacts all of the state. And so there were bills that were filed, House Bill 1331 specifically, that would have capped the amount of revenue that a municipal utility can return to its city's general fund and further reduce that amount based on the percentage of utility customers that reside outside the city limits. The bill not only impacted electric, but also water and wastewater utilities. We worked very closely with Cindy Clements and her team at Lakeland Electric to be able to work with our delegation members to explain why this should not apply to Lakeland and the advantages that Lakeland and the community has for these revenues. Fortunately, the bill only went to one committee. It was never heard in the Senate, so that bill did not advance any further. On a sidetrack, however, House Bill 1645 was introduced as a local bill that specifically addressed Gainesville Regional Utility. That changes their entire board makeup, so it removes the governing body that is there currently and we'll replace it with governor's appointees. And it also caps the amount that they're able to return to the city of Gainesville in revenues. That bill has not yet been sent to the governor, but we have no illusions that he will veto it, so that bill will go forward after July 1. I do want to caution, even though that was the driving impetus behind the other bill that we discussed, the bill sponsor in the House has a philosophical issue of representing people outside, serving people outside the city limits. And so I anticipate that we will be dealing with this issue for the next several years at a minimum. So I just want to keep that on your radar. We avoided it this year, but it certainly has not gone away and will not go away. I'm just going to continue moving forward just for sake of time, but if you have any questions on any of these issues, please feel free to ask me afterwards. Sovereign immunity. We've seen this the last couple of years. Currently, your sovereign immunity limits for local government and state government is $200,000 per individual and $300,000 per incident. This year, the House bill was filed that would have increased those limits to $2.5 million and $5 million respectively. It did go through one committee and received a tremendous amount of pushback. The Senate bill would have simply doubled the amounts from 200, 300 to 400 and 600, and then also tapped into the consumer price index for future increases. That bill was never heard. The bills died at the end of session. Again, another issue I think that we'll continue to see come up year after year. Those limits of 200 and 300 were set many years ago, so there may be something in the future that adjusts those amounts, but just wanted to keep that on your radar as well. Traffic and pedestrian safety, something that we had to deal with a couple years ago. No legislation was filed this year, and the bill sponsor for that is actually leaving the legislature. So we'll keep that one kind of on the back burner, just keep an eye for anything that comes up in the future. Regional intercity transit management and funding. This is a relatively new issue that we brought forward this past year. I think that what we're going to do is look for some of our delegation to sponsor a bill for next year. Nothing was filed this year. And another big one, local ordinances. Again, a pretty major issue I kind of want to talk about for a couple of minutes here. The bill did pass. It is waiting to be sent to the governor. And basically what it does, it's going to require all cities and counties to prepare a business impact statement for an ordinance that will have an impact on for-profit businesses. The bill also allows businesses to delay enactment of any new ordinances by filing a suit challenging the validity of the ordinance if they deem that there is something wrong with the ordinance or that's going to impact them negatively. And it also provides up to $50,000 in attorney fees if the challenge is successful. There are a number of ordinances that are not covered by this, that are exempt from the language. Those are relating to building code and fire safety code, as well as any ordinances implementing your budget or budget amendments and revenue sources necessary to fund the budget. So fees, financing, procurement, growth management, land use ordinances are all exempt, as well as emergency ordinances and any ordinances that are necessary to enact state or federal law. So those are exempt from needing the business impact statement as well as the legal provisions as well. The business impact statement goes into effect October 1 if the governor signs it, which we anticipate he will. And basically, you need to make a reasonable effort to address the purpose of the ordinance, the reasonable estimate of direct impact on local businesses, for-profit businesses, and any new fees or charges that come forward, as well as the number of businesses that would be impacted. So it's a little bit of work. The state of Florida, we currently utilize staff analysis for every bill that gets filed. That's basically their impression is it's a good faith effort to put forward what the impact of a proposed ordinance would be. So we do anticipate that will be signed and go into effect October 1 for any ordinances beyond that date. Moving into some of the budget items, the budget priorities that we had. Everybody obviously around the state is very interested in moving Florida forward, including us here in Lakeland. The proposal that the governor put forward for the $7 billion in funding did contain that $197 million for the I-4 State Road 33 interchange. I know you all are very intimately familiar with what that project entails. The big question right now is the legislature funded it at $4 billion, not $7 billion. And they did not include the $3 billion in redirects when they finalized their budget. We are still working with DOT, and as of this morning when we reached out, DOT Central has not yet put forward what their plan is going to be. What we have been told is they plan on working on all 20 projects. Now, there are some that have a start date of construction for 2024, like the I-4 State Road 33 interchange, and there are others that have a delayed start date of 2025 and 2026. We assume they're going to try to do them in timing orders so they can come back and get that $3 billion next year, but we're still waiting on clarification. So I can't give you a firm answer at this point, only that we have been told by DOT Central that they plan on implementing all 20 projects. So to the best of our knowledge, we should be able to get that full. And obviously, as soon as we learn anything, we'll be letting you know. Polk Regional Water Cooperative Funding, we were seeking $20 million as an entity. As you're well aware, those who are involved with PRWC, there is a ranked list of projects. The first three projects are the two well fields and the third PRWC project, and then the municipalities have all of their ranked as well. We weren't able to get the 20 million, unfortunately. There is 8.5 million that's in the budget. That would cover the two well fields. That would cover the West Polk well field project as well for this year. Lakeland, our 7 Wetlands Water Education Center, Senator Burton and Representative Kennedy were able to get us the $950,000. I've had a conversation with the governor's Office of Policy and Budget. They had very simple questions on where we are in the status of the construction of that project. Very positive. We're hopeful this year they'll allow that to go through. So once the governor signs the budget, we will know. There's also $2.3 million for the Historic Preservation Grant Funding. We have a $50,000 piece in there for the Historic Districts Resurvey Phase 1. And so that is fully funded at this point. And then finally, there are $6 million for the 6 DCA courthouse for design and planning of that courthouse. They chose not to fully fund construction. They want to go ahead and get the process going properly. Some of the issues that we labeled to watch: affordable housing, the Live Local Act. That was the priority for Senate President Passidomo. Actually passed the second day of session, and I think the House passed it a few weeks later, but it went to the governor and was signed. Goes into effect on July 1. We have some more information contained in this document that you have in front of you for how that will impact local governments and also for the future of affordable housing in the state. Again, monumental legislation, record funding, $711 million for this year. There are also tax credits in place for developers to be able to put forward new projects, but there are some ramifications on local governments that are contained in the document, and we're happy to get you all that information as well. No legislation filed this year on impact fees to impair your ability to assess them. One that's not very popular, financial disclosure for elected officials. Currently, all county constitutional officers and state elected officials have to file a Form 6 disclosure, the long form. They did expand that to include all local elected officials as well. So beginning January 1, you will have to file a long form as opposed to the short form. Now, the governor did sign that, and it already went into effect. And then local business taxes, nothing was filed to restrict the authority to collect or spend local business taxes. Red light cameras, no legislation. First year in a while, no legislation was filed to repeal the red light camera statute. State library aid funding, they maintained their funding at $19.4 million. That's a program that Lakeland libraries are able to tap into as well. A couple of other issues that we did not have on here prior, but I went ahead and put them in. Land use and development regulations, Senate Bill 1604. This one became prominent at the end of session because it's actually what the Disney language was placed on late in session. But the meat of the bill, it revises local comprehensive planning requirements by increasing the 2 required planning periods to 10-year and 20-year periods from 5 and 10, and also prohibits local governments that fail to update their comprehensive plans in accordance with the 7-year EAR process from initiating or adopting any publicly initiated plan amendments until that is done. The bill passed and was sent to the governor, and he signed it beginning of May. Similarly, local government comprehensive plan, Senate Bill 540. It provides attorney fees to the prevailing party in a comprehensive plan or plan amendment challenge. It's still trying to determine how that will impact local governments. This is really an issue for those in the community who wish to challenge for environmental purposes. So we want to make sure it stays on your radar, and I'm happy to work with Palmer to make sure he has all the information to see if this has an impact on the city as well. Land and water management, an issue that did not go through, would have prohibited local governments from adopting regulations, rules, or ordinances relating to water quality, quantity, pollution control, discharge prevention, et cetera. The bills were never heard. They never went forward at all, but I just want to put this on our radar for keeping an eye on in the future as well. And then one last good bill that passed was the water wastewater facility operators. There are a lot of industries, as you are very aware, that are having difficulty in hiring. Water wastewater is one of them. So this actually provides reciprocity. It allows DEP to provide reciprocity for those who are licensed in other jurisdictions or have comparable work in the military to be able to come in and get a license more quickly and be able to get to work. So awaiting final action from the governor. As you all, I know you all read the newspaper, it's a very momentous year on a number of other issues. Immigration, E-Verify, a lot of cultural issues went through, as well as this kind of got lost in the shuffle because it happened early, but constitutional carry passed as well. So a lot of different bills that we were keeping an eye on. Just want to make sure you're all aware of that. We have a couple of slides here with additional information on the affordable housing components that, again, signed by the governor already. Tax package, just want to mention this one briefly. Major tax package went through this year, $2.7 billion in total. There are 6 sales tax holidays, 2 of which are ongoing at this moment. But for the local government perspective, it also reduces the sales tax rate on commercial leases. That's funding that the state is going to absorb the cost of, but just want to make sure that you're aware for your local business as well. That will be cut from 5.5% to 4.5%. Beginning December 2023, and will stay at that rate until they drop it down to 2% with other funding plans they have in place. And there is also a freeze on local communication service tax rate increases until January 1, 2026. Again, just some more information on the sales tax holidays. We're currently in the disaster preparedness and the Freedom Summer sales tax holidays. What's next? So we have a leadership issue that's going on in the House. They pick their future speakers well in advance, so usually by July 1 of their first term. We do have a member of our delegation, Representative Jennifer Kennedy, who is one of 2 finalists for potentially being Speaker for class. That vote will take place beginning of July, and so we'll know if we have a future speaker in our midst. Looking ahead for committee weeks, next year is an early session. We will be in January and February, beginning January 9th. So they are adding in 7 weeks of committee meetings beginning in September. And so we have quite the lengthy agenda ahead of us. It's going to be a quick turnaround. We're already working with members for legislation for next year as well. And with that, I am going to stop talking and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dave Shep. I know Commissioner McLeod, who sits on the legislative committee with Commissioner Simmons and I, had to leave a few minutes early, and I'm sure he'll circle back with you if he has any questions. But just for the public and for my fellow commissioners, these committee weeks are imperative because we really need to be talking to our delegation in tandem with Dave Shep while they're home, more so than while they're at session. So I've said this for years and I'll continue to say it. We need to be, if there are things that we need to strategize about as a legislative committee, Commissioner Simmons, Commissioner McLeod, and I can do that with Dave and with you all as well, so that we are targeted and explicit and strategic in meeting with our delegation in their off times. As you know, just like with the City Commission, we are considered part-time. Our legislators, House members and senators, are also considered part-time, many of whom still have their own businesses and they still have their own careers. So if you look at that committee week schedule when we go into a January session, that's not a lot of time off. So if we can capture them ahead of the curve before they go to Tallahassee, by the time, this is probably a little, makes everyone a little squirmy, but by the time session hits, it rolls so fast. Yes, we can mitigate some of the instances that are occurring that might be irreparable to local governments while they're in legislative session, but really the onus is on us to sort of meet with them and get them engaged in our priority issues. I want to give kudos to Mr. Shep, too, and Emily Cologne, and the 3 of us had met and talked about prior to this legislative session, sort of whittling down what our strategic asks are for the city of Lakeland. We want to be very cognizant of not taking a whole menu into our legislative delegates, but really being targeted and saying these are our top 5 that we really like help with and assistance with. And so we have worked pretty significantly and hammering that home and not taking just, throwing a bunch of spaghetti against the wall to see what happens, and really leveraging support from our peers and our commission and being targeted in doing that. Legislators are tasked with a really big job. Their number one priority is pass a budget every session for those 60 days, which they've done so this year. But I was eager to ask about the governor and when he will be reviewing the budget. But you said you guys think it might be this week.
So this is the third consecutive week I'm saying we believe it's going to happen this
Okay.
week, which is what we've been hearing from his staff as well. So eventually that will be true.
It's
But
pretty
it should be pretty
traditional.
soon.
Yeah, and for people that don't know, I've been in and around and lobbying adjacent to the state legislature since I was the state director of Best Buddies Florida in the mid-90s under Governor Jeb Bush. And so we would always have things in the budget that got vetoed, usually about June 4th was when those vetoes would come out. So we pay attention to that the first week of June. Questions? I know Commissioner Music had a couple questions for you, Mr. Shep.
Thank you. Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. One of the things that's always of interest to me is just the session stats, like how many, bills were filed and then how many passed. I look at it a little bit differently myself. The less they pass, the better I feel as a citizen personally. When we're talking about, you said that we had House Bill 1647 that specifically dealt with that particular issue, and you're saying that for the electric, you were saying that you didn't think that it's going to be gone just because they may address the certain issue that was the bad child doesn't mean that it's going to be taken off. So you're not hopeful that them addressing the specific issue will help those of us that are doing it well. You think it's still going to come back because why? What is it that they see on the good players that they want to attack?
Primarily, to answer your question, primarily because there are 160 legislators. And they all have different backgrounds. They all have different wants and needs and things that stick in their craw. And there are certain members of the legislature who have philosophical differences of opinion when it comes to municipal utilities. And so that's primarily why we're going to have to deal with it. We have, we're just going to name names. We've had to deal with Vero Beach in the past. And once Vero Beach was resolved, the issue kind of subsided for a few years. And then Gainesville, unfortunately, had their challenges, which were cast out to all municipal utilities. So we had to deal with the issue this year. But in the conversations that we have had with the sponsor, primarily on the House side, it is something that is a philosophical difference of opinion that she has for basically being able to provide services outside of your jurisdiction, outside of your city limits, and be able to charge a rate that, quite frankly, my understanding is it's not very different from the amount that we charge for in-city, but she just feels that they don't get the same services. For the record, I live outside the city of Lakeland. I live down in the county. The only things I don't get from the city are police and fire. We have Grady Judd. We have a good fire department. I'm not terribly concerned about that. We utilize city services on a daily basis, even though we live outside. So I'm happy to make that argument. Our delegation understands the importance of Lakeland Electric and the importance of the arrangement that we have with the city of Lakeland. So we have great advocates here. But we will have to contend with people who just are of a different opinion.
We're a little unique too in the way that that our utility commission has been pieced together. We have representation from those unincorporated areas. So I'm not necessarily certain that GRU did that when they are in other service areas, but I feel like we have a really solid leg to stand on in saying that we have a breadth of experience of people who've retired from LE, and they might be they might purchase power as one of our largest employers that sit on the utility commission. So I think we give a really good spectrum of people who are impacted by city services for Lakeland Electric inside and outside of those city limits. And I think that's something that our delegation understands pretty completely.
I agree with that.
In addition to that, if I may add, at our utility committee meeting on yesterday, Jack English actually brought that point out, that he lives outside the city, and that he also gave a stat that I was somewhat surprised about, and I can't remember the stat exactly, but it indicated that there's a significant portion of Lakeland Electric users who live outside the city of Lakeland. Do you know that, Sean? What that stat is? That percentage? I think you might have said 60.
I'm pretty sure it's
Yeah, I might have said
60% is
60.
outside city limits.
And that's why the composition of that utility commission is so important. And I think that the city of Lakeland's done that really well over the years. Commissioner Madden?
Thank you. I just, of course, this is my diatribe, but I'd also like to say that the person who is a proponent of this bill lives where she has Florida Power and Light. So I think it's really disingenuous for anyone to put a bill forward and call it taxation without representation when they get a private company who gives their shareholders all their money that they make with their dividends. So it's not even like comparing apples with apples. I mean, it's just kind of a crazy way to look as a particular person with a persuasion to think that everything should be privatized, number one. And secondly, look for any way that they can cut taxes and feel good about themselves. So to call a municipal utility a tax instead of calling it a business, an enterprise, a way that we are able to get another revenue stream for our city that other people don't. They give it over to the private companies. Fine, good for them. We don't go try to tell the private companies what to do with their dividends. I don't know why they would care what we do with our dividend at Lakeland Electric, especially when it's at the state legislature and we as a city decided this over 100 years ago, this is what we want to do. So why they can come in and tell us what we can do, with this business enterprise, it's not like it's not our ad valorem tax, it's not our impact fees, it's not an actual tax, it's an enterprise fund that makes money and the dividends go back to our city, and our city's the one that had to bond out $150 million plus to be able to build the infrastructure to provide the electricity. Those folks outside the city limits did not have to go through that bonding process. They didn't have to invest in those assets. So, and most of those 60% outside the city limits have a Lakeland address. So they feel like Lakelanders when they come downtown Lakeland but it's difficult because, like we use our dividend to pay for things like public safety and fire trucks and parks. And so they want to say, well, that's just pork in your budget. You should cut that. And I want to be like, well, really? Like, who are you to tell us that? Come visit our city. We don't have beaches. We don't have, some of the other amenities other places, but our quality of life has been built because we made a decision to have an enterprise fund, to have a municipal electric utility. So it is incumbent upon all of us to know those talking points and to know what we're up against when we're going against someone who proposes a bill who has no idea of the quality of life we have or what we have instituted by referendum by our people in Lakeland. So I think we just need to keep, I know Lakeland Electric's working on their communication plan with Dave, and just we should for sure at least know the talking points.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Music.
Just one, and it was kind of glossed over a little bit on this, other issues, and that is the Immigration E-Verify, SB 1718. What are kind of you hearing as far as the repercussions out there from that?
We're going to watch that play out over the next several weeks and months. Obviously, we're hearing there are going to be a lot of repercussions in the private industry, primarily agricultural and labor and things of that nature. Roofing, labor, yep. The bill, so real quickly, what it did for the private businesses, if you think back 2 years ago when they passed E-Verify the first time, all governments have to do E-Verify. If you're a private business, you either have to do E-Verify or the I-9 form. What they decided this year was the I-9 form might be a little too flexible for their taste, and so any business with more than 25 employees has to do E-Verify. Those that are smaller can continue using E-Verify or I-9. That is the biggest challenge that we've heard so far from the business community. They didn't really change anything in that regard for state and local governments. It's potentially going to be a challenge. I kind of glossed over it because we're still waiting to see how that plays out as well, but there are some big ramifications coming forward.
It's from the federal level down through the state, yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the state kind of took it a little bit further too, but yes.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Mann.
I did have a question, Dave, just on the local ordinance SB 170 and HB 1515 about the requiring us to post an impact statement prior to an ordinance. I'm looking, I was trying to kind of see the psychology behind a bill, I'm thinking coming out of COVID, is that mask mandates and those kind of things that they just don't want to see again, have an impact on businesses, or because it exempts building code, fire safety code, which are the common things I hear from businesses that make business difficult, or they find out that they have a code that they didn't know about that costs them so much. And so just curious, what this, if it's not about our land codes or our building codes, or emergency, what really would this be that could impact businesses?
So the genesis of this legislation is to do away with preemption bills in Tallahassee. That was the stated goal of President Pasadomo when she brought it forward last year. So the goal is, she doesn't want to have food fights up there all the time and having to pass preemptions, preempting local governments from banning the use of plastic bags or sunscreen. That's really what started all of this. And so that's why they've gone this route of doing the business impact statement is, if you're going to ban the use of a product or ban the existence of a business, then you're going to have to say what that impact would be. If purely hypothetical for anybody listening, but if a community were to decide they're going to ban all vaping stores, if they're going to ban tobacco stores, things of that nature, they would have to put that forward in an ordinance of what that impact would be. They're going to be challenged in court, but really the cruise ships, sunscreen, single-use plastics, that's the genesis of this legislation, is to get around that, not have to go to Tallahassee each year and do a preemption bill saying you cannot pass an ordinance dealing with this. That was the purpose.
Else? Yes, Commissioner Simmons?
Yes, on the affordable housing, can you elaborate as to how that would benefit us locally within the city of Lakeland?
Can give more of a high level. This should incentivize a lot of developers who wish to make affordable housing and make it more worth their while. It's kind of hard to say specifically how it's going to impact each community, but you should have a scenario where there's the opportunity with funding that's in place, with tax credits that are in place, and with, I'll get in trouble with Brian Roos, I'm sure, but, some of the different land use density and things of that nature, changes that are coming forward in the bill. It's pretty comprehensive, but it's trying to make it so that they have an opportunity to put in more affordable housing, putting all the pieces together.
There's additional funding.
Yes, sir. As we talked about earlier, $711 million. A lot of that goes to the SHIP program, the State Housing Initiatives program. I probably just got that wrong. And the SAIL program dealing with apartments. So there is a lot of funding coming in. A portion of that is recurring as well. We have fought year after year to try to get more money into the affordable housing programs.
How much
and just
additional,
accomplish that.
how much additional funding is there?
For this year, there's $711 million.
Not, the governor hasn't signed off on that
He hasn't
yet.
signed it yet, and is sleeping. Oh, okay. Sean? So there's $259 million for the SAIL program, $252 million for the SHIP program, which is the housing. Inflation loan program, $100 million. Florida Hometown Heroes, which is relatively new, that was from last year. That's for your police, fire, military, $100 million program for them for first-time home buyers. So they're trying to put in a lot of different components.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Commissioner Reed?
Thank you. And Dave, you may have covered it. I was looking for, I don't know what number it was. I'd read somewhere where if as a zoning action that we pass and somebody wants to challenge it, they have to set up a fund and the challenger is responsible for reimbursement of the fees to the litigant.
Relating to zoning challenges?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Okay.
think it's yeah.
So
There were a
if-
couple
if-
that
if
passed.
a citizen, if the city commission passed the comp plan amendment and a citizen disagreed with that and challenged it in court and lost, then they would have to pay our attorney's fees. It's previously only been the other way around. where we had to
Something
pay
new.
their
That's
attorney's
something new
fees.
though, right?
Protecting us a little bit.
Yeah.
It was Senate Bill 540, I believe, so it is prevailing party, which actually, and that's the one that I mentioned, that Palmer's going to want to look into, just see what the impacts are, but that is actually one of the benefits, is that if we are successful, if there's a challenge against the city, then we get the prevailing attorney's fees.
Well, probably a good thing for
Dave, this is a great thorough review of this session. I feel like it's a quick turnaround till next session. And just for the public at large, on the even years, we have early session, January to March. That is to go along with the campaigning, and because that's usually a presidential every 4 years. So we just started doing that 10 years ago.
Became fashionable about 10 years ago. It used to
Yeah.
only be with reapportionment.
Yeah.
in the past.
So-
Well, I just want to thank you all very much for the opportunity to represent the city. I appreciate Commissioner Simmons, as well as Mayor Mutz and Commissioners McCarley and Madden for coming to Tallahassee, along with Sean and Emily. It certainly helps when you're there as well. But to Commissioner McCarley's point, now is the time to be meeting with our delegation. There will be a delegation meeting sometime in the fall. That'll be determined later. But they know us well. They know you well. They live here in the community. We just need to make sure that they have all of our interests at heart as well. So thank you very much.
Thank y'all. And this committee meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
I will not be at the next meeting. My son is getting married.